Last season began with lots of hope for White Sox fans, and whoops, did not end too well. This year, there's a lot of pessimism going to the season. Does that mean it's going to go great? Let's find out when Nick Murawski of Locked On White Sox joins us for today's episode of Locked On MLB.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. If you don't believe me, then why would I have the lower third that says Sully right there? I am an Emmy-nominated television producer who has been a baseball podcaster for the last more than a decade now. This is now the beginning of my fifth season here at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I'm recording from the luxurious and rain-drenched Locked On MLB studios in Pasadena, California, overlooking the historic Rose Bowl. Wow, I didn't realize I moved to Oregon. If you've been in LA, it was snowing. What's going on here? Up is down, black is white, and the White Sox don't know what's going on. We're going to be talking about that today. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as we're working very slowly to 1 billion subscribers. Please help us get to 1 billion. We're several hundred million short of the goal. But hey, my goal today was very simple. Get friend of the podcast, Nick Murawski, back on the show to talk a little bit about that so very strange franchise that plays in the south side of Chicago. The one whose stadium I visited last year. There was no game being played there, but I decided to visit it anyway. That's the kind of baseball fan I am. And from the secret Chicago White Sox fan cave comes Nick Murawski, surrounded by White Sox goodness. By the way, before we get into that, I think you're wearing is that the 1917 hat that you have on
Well,
there?
it is. It's like a hybrid. This is their spring training hat that they
Okay.
introduced last season, but it borrows from the 1917, 1919 kind of era.
You know, you and I have talked about this. Podcasting legend Jimmy Pardo and I have talked about this. I think it's time for a facelift for the look of the Chicago White Sox. I think it used to be every other year they would have a new uniform they wore, and they've been staying with their traditional go-go socks, 2005 socks, uniforms for a long time now. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but I think it's time to mix it up. I would love it if they always went to the Win and Ugly uh, 1983.
Yeah, the
Sox
Hitman
across the
logo.
chest. The Hitman, yeah. I
Yeah.
wouldn't mind that, but I like that their spring training hat is they're mixing things up. Let's go back to that logo for a little bit. As long
Yeah.
as they don't have the cursive C, which I thought looked like an E, which I thought was just a little too weird. But I like that hat. I'd like to mix things up a little bit, mix up our
Yeah,
pitches.
they have so many uniforms. Oh my goodness, you're right. They were changing one after another, and they've got the City Connects now, and
Yep,
on Sundays they wear the 83s.
I love
And
them.
this,
I love them.
this is obviously the 40th anniversary this year of the 1983 team.
Yep.
So they're going to keep those around. But if they would take that logo and maybe do a black and white version, I wouldn't mind that at all.
By the way, can I just say, I know when Nick and I were prepping for pulling back the curtain, when we were prepping for this podcast, we sort of knew what we were going to be talking about. And as usual, we take any of that prepping and we throw it right into the garbage because our conversations go this way. Is it just me, or is sometimes the spring training hats and logos that they wear better than the actual hats they wear during the regular season? Like, not just for the White Sox, like the Royals have the KC with the crown on it during spring training, or the Astros have the circle around there, and the Texas Rangers have the TX with the state of Texas on it. I'm going like, Those are better than your regular hats. Why don't you just wear those hats during the
Yeah,
season?
I guess you could think of it like an album for folks that don't know what albums are. You can figure that out. But like I would say, it's the spring training look is like the B side. It's a little bit more creative. Maybe it's not
Mhm.
going to get the radio play. It's not as buttoned up, but it's experimental. Where your regular uniforms are a little bit buttoned up.
Yeah. So, in other words, using a Beatles analogy, the regular season would be Penny Lane, and the spring training would be Tomorrow Never Knows.
Yeah, there you go.
There you
It's
go. I
simple as
can't.
that, folks.
I honestly can't think of a better analogy than that. Maybe I'll tell you. You know what this just hit me? What the White Sox should do, because they've had so many. They've had the socks across the jersey, like the Harold Baines, Ron Kittle specials in the '80s. You had the lapels and the Chicago, like
That was
with
the
Oscar,
Hitman, the
the Hitman, the Oscar
1977. Yeah,
Gamble, Richie
yeah.
Zisk, all of them in Claudel Washington wore those. Those are for you could wear those. You wear the ones that have the red pinstripes, the Dick Allen specials.
Yep.
Then you have the Frank Thomas specials, like they wore, the '95 unis. Then maybe you do the Cursive C's, which I
Yep.
like to call call those the Dark Ages.
That uniform right there, though, that was the last uniform of Comiskey Park, the
That's true.
original. So like
That's
that
true.
holds a little bit of a special place now. It's getting some more play amongst fans because
Okay.
1990 they wore that uniform from 87 to 90. 90
Right.
was the last year of old Comiskey.
And then you have the hat you have,
Yeah.
where it's like it's the OX in between the curves of
Mhm.
the S,
Yep.
and then you wear the there was one where the X was made of two baseball bats,
Yes. Yeah.
and the O was a ball, which I thought that was pretty awesome. That's
1920 something. The thing
Yeah,
you
I
just don't want to do, though, is go back to the wool jerseys. You don't want to go to the
no,
100% wool, the wool jerseys with the 3/4 sleeves.
but I bet if we roll up our sleeves, our proverbial sleeves here, okay, we could come up with 7 variations of the White Sox uniform. Have one be the Sunday, one be the Tuesday. Every day they come out with something.
And I'm sure MLB would love that, and they would approve it 100%. They love that kind of stuff.
Oh man. Okay, we've gone off the rails a little
Sure.
bit here. Anything to not talk about the 2022 White Sox,
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
went in. You know what? I'll tell you what, the 2022 White Sox, in some ways, in my opinion, should be used as like a cautionary tale of what you do when it's clear the manager isn't working, but you don't make the change. Like the Phillies, the two teams that were great in 1983, the Phillies and the White Sox. The Phillies they had a high profile manager in Joe Girardi, World Series champion, former manager of the year. It wasn't working, but they didn't say, well, he's Joe. Well, things will work itself out. They made the change. The culture of the team shifted, and obviously we saw they got to within 2 wins of winning the World Series.
Yep.
You had a very talented White Sox team, albeit with a razor thin rotation by the end of the year. And it was so clear to anybody with 2 eyes that La Russa wasn't working. And La Russa wasn't the whole problem, but boy, oh boy, it's a big Jenga piece that they could have removed. And
Yeah, there was a ton of injuries, which I think the front office kind of hid behind of like, well, what would you do with this team? No matter if we changed La Russa or not, we don't have our core players all on the field at the same time, but you're right. I mean, once Miguel Cairo came in, and again, he started off and it was, boy, the team was responding. They were on a roll. I think it was around the time you and I talked towards the end of the season. It was like, this team might have a chance to get back into playoff competition. And then they kind of fizzled out after they got absolutely embarrassed by Cleveland.
Well, Cleveland steamrolled both Chicago and Minnesota.
Yeah.
I mean, they basically said, they said, F this. This is our division. They put it under both.
It was impressive.
Arms.
It absolutely was impressive what they did with that talent. And I think the Sox went into the season with a lack of urgency. Hey, we're the defending division champs. We're going to run this thing back, and Cleveland, and a lot of other teams said, no, you're not. We know how to beat you. You've got 2 corner outfielders that aren't outfielders. We're going to take every extra base possible.
Yeah.
And then once we started, getting the injury bug, which has been a problem for the Sox for several years, they just outplayed us. Most
Yeah.
teams just completely outplayed us as soon as the first pitch happened.
But and again, I'm not trying to. I'm not going to try to knock on this too much, and I won't focus on much more than this segment. I do think that if there's this thing pressing down on the team, that if you sort of pull that tooth, if they had pulled that tooth early, and there would have been, they had the easiest way to pull the tooth of, LaRussa being the tooth, which was say, Tony, it's not working. We're not going to fire you. We're not going to humiliate you. We could just say, we're promoting you to vice president of Franks and Beans and Franks, assistant to the general, whatever, and you could create a title for him. Not a single person would have looked down upon LaRussa. He would have been able to say his last final season was a division champ, blah, 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 all these different things. And every team has injuries. Every team has massive injuries. Every team gets decimated with injuries. So, I mean, especially the way that pitching staffs are handled now. So I'm not going to, give too much credence to, well, they had a ton of injuries. Every team goes through that. And they got a out of the blue Cy Young caliber season out of Dylan Cease, and they got some effective starts out of Johnny Cueto. Not that he was his old self like he was with the Reds, but he still was a lot more than I thought they were going to squeeze out of him.
Yeah.
And yes, I know Anderson was gone for most of the year, and their outfield was an absolute mess. But that's when I say so was Atlanta Braves, where they picked up the Jorge Solers and the Jock Petersons, and they wound up winning the freaking World Series. Go make the adjustments.
Yeah, exactly. Go make the adjustments, and they just did not have the coaching staff to do that. I don't think the people that were surrounding Tony La Russa were very forward-thinking at all. It wasn't a team of rivals. It was my way or the highway, and yes, replacing Tony La Russa would have been the easy decision. But who put Tony La Russa in place? Jerry Reinsdorf.
Yeah,
and if you want to go back to the early 80s conversations, why Tony La Russa became part of the White Sox organization yet again, no one maybe will ever know, but it's a belief that, of course, it was Jerry Reinsdorf putting him in place after Ricky Renteria. So you're not going to tell the owner, you know what, we're gonna take care of La Russa here and get rid of him. It was just a bad situation.
They needed a boost of some kind of like when I need a boost, and I grab myself a Built Bar. Let me just tell you something. Built Bars, they're getting better and better. It's soon. I mean, it's raining like crazy here, but once the rain subsides, it's going to be springtime. You're not going to be wearing big, bulky winter clothes anymore. You want to look good, don't you? Well, guess what? You got to try your Built Bars. I'm not kidding. They're healthy and they're tasty, covered in 100% real chocolate, and they have great flavors. Churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond. My personal favorite is the raspberry. I love the raspberry and chocolate because you got that kind of tanginess going on there. It's almost like a jelly donut. It's fantastic. It tastes so good. Do you know how they do it? I don't know. They won't tell me. They taste like candy bars while maintaining amazing macros. And what's better, they're healthy. You want some stats? I know we're stats oriented here in baseball. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and 17 grams of protein. That is very high in the macros above replacement protein bar, which is the stat that they like to use here at the Locked On Podcast Network. And you don't have to wait around for a box either. Remember that we used to wait for it to come in the box. Check the mailbox every day. Where are my Built Bars? Where are my Built Bars? Don't worry about it. Go to Walmart. Go to the pharmacy section. Get your box of Built Bars, 4-bar box. Cookies and cream, double chocolate, coconut puffs. You got them. Or you go to Sam's Club. Grab a 13-bar box. 13 bars. You get great flavors. Brownie batter, churro, you name it, they got it. That's why you got to be going to get yourself some Built Bars. Just like the jingle tells you, Built Bars, they're real good. Okay. Now we're here with Nick Murawski, who is looking around, not realizing that there were lyrics that we were supposed to sing on the Built Bar ad read.
I didn't know.
No, I'm totally full of it. As if you didn't know. Okay, let's tackle. Let's try to be positive first.
Sure.
Okay. Because there was again, the first thing out of my mouth was going to be something really negative, and I said no. Let's attempt to be positive here. The White Sox. I thought they were just gonna when La Russa stepped down. I really thought they were just gonna hand the car keys to Miguel Cairo, based upon the fact that he had familiarity with the team. They seemed to at least initially respond well to them, but they didn't. They didn't. And I'm going to have you say the manager's name because every time I've said it, it's I've mispronounced it. Eventually, I'll say it correctly. But with someone with a name like Murawski, I'm sure you've been correcting people's pronunciation your whole damn life.
Yeah.
So please tell us about the new manager of the White Sox and what the initial response is for him.
Pedro Grifol, he
Grifol. Hold on, I'm going to write that phonetically right here.
Yeah, he was. He's the end result of apparently a very exhaustive managerial search. And the first time the White Sox went outside of the organization to find their manager since maybe the early 90s, Gene Lamont, White Sox fans know that name. And, they were looking for somebody with experience, successful experience, managing before, forward thinking, I believe, talking about metrics and numbers and the new language of baseball. And they landed on Pedro Grifol, and it was Rick Hahn, the general manager. I think his opportunity to finally hire a manager. This is his guy. So if this guy is successful, Rick Hahn is successful. That was not the case with La Russa, as we mentioned before.
Was that the case with Renteria?
Renteria was the bench coach for Robin Ventura. So you want to talk about no managerial search. It was simply, okay, Robin Ventura is stepping down, which was the smartest decision ever. He should have never been hired, but that's, again, another episode. Renteria, which I liked, was brought in, and, he was not retained after the 2020 season after we got bounced by the A's. So Grifol, I don't think he brings in, when you think of success, it's like, okay, he was around for the Kansas City Royals World Series, and but he doesn't have any, prior MLB managerial experience. However, his resume speaks for itself. He has done just about everything you can. Spent a long time with the Royals organization. Everybody speaks so highly of him. And I think it was just moving into a different direction for the White Sox, different mentality, a different culture. We're going to start doing things a different way. And he's been allowed to bring pretty much his own coaching staff in. He's brought some guys from the Royals. He brought a Jose Castro, hitting coach for the Atlanta Braves, and everything you read during the offseason. Again, it's just been the off season and all these great quotes and everybody's in the best shape of their lives and all this kind of stuff. But I like what I've been hearing. I like how he's going to, attack spring training and what his plans are and the chemistry and the communication. And he's been having meetings with players and asking for their input. How do you want to see things run? And that's how he's running things right now in Arizona. So I wasn't particularly, high on Grifol when he first was hired, a little skeptical, but I'm starting to really buy into what he's selling. It's one thing to say it. Now you got to get the players to buy into it.
Right. First of all, I just want to say, you mentioned Gene Lamont, who was the manager of the White Sox in the early 90s. Well, they had success under Lamont, especially 93, and if the 94 season would have played out to its entirety, who knows, that it may have been a Chicago-Montreal World Series, seeing Tim Raines back in Montreal. But Lamont was a lieutenant of Jim Leland, who was a lieutenant of Tony La Russa from when La Russa was managing the White Sox. So there was still, at least there was some tentacles or some at least tangential relation to Lamont with the White Sox at that point. You made two really great points in what you were saying about Grifol, first, other than making me finally understand how to pronounce his last name. There's two things about it that I think, if you're a White Sox fan, should be encouraging. There was a sense that there was a real, at least from an outsider's point of view, there was a sense there was a real dysfunction on the team. La Russa was there because Reinsdorf had just watched the Michael Jordan thing where he was, oh boy, I made some bad decisions about Phil Jackson. I probably should have let Tony La Russa go. Tony, are you still here? Tony, you want to come back? I'm part of me is 100% convinced that's what happened. But the other thing was that you got a sense that ownership wanted one thing, management wanted another thing, and it's sort of the house divided situation. You saw just as an outsider that the 2022 White Sox, and to a degree the 2021 White Sox, who managed to at least win the division and get into the playoffs, albeit they didn't get very far, but at least they won the freaking division. You could see these 2 years. It was there were two captains, and with Grifol being a Han hire, this is like, okay, we're all in sync right now, at least for now. Let's all speak where we're all facing the same direction. And I look at, I'm not a player, despite the rumors. I've never played for the White Sox, but you must think that somewhere if you're in a dysfunctional organization, when you come into work every day, part of you must be looking around and going like, okay, what's going on today? What are we doing
Yeah,
today?
I think there was a general respect for La Russa because obviously, look
He's
at
a
his
Hall of Famer.
resume. He's
Yeah,
a Hall of
yeah,
Famer and he should be a Hall of Famer.
yes.
And it's like, okay, he's here. I'm going to listen, but maybe it wasn't necessarily buying in. And now I get the impression from guys like Yohan Moncada and Anderson, who went to Driveline in Washington and like
Hmm.
is trying to get better. Moncada entering his 7th season, and we
Yeah.
still don't know his ceiling. He has been answering every text, every message Grifol is leaving, like asking questions and wanting more of Grifol. Like, what did you see with this White Sox team when you were with the Kansas City Royals? Like, what did you
Hmm.
see of me from a distance? I want to get better. How can I get better? And I think he's at the point of his career, as are so many players on this team, of time is now.
Right.
And of course, everybody's hoping for health and return to accustomed levels. But I think it's the preparedness you're going to see out of Grifol, the urgency, and doing the little things, playing the game right. It's just fundamentals, and that's what they're going to get back to.
Yeah, and that was another thing I want to bring up. He's coming. It's actually there's two. You bring it up another. You're always bringing up the good points, Nick Murawski. This is what you do. And if you want more like this, subscribe to Locked On White Sox. It's like this all the time there. Now, it's the thing I really liked about it was that it was beyond just this is we're in unison. This is my guy, and we're gonna be lock stock. We're in unison here. But it was also an acknowledgement that we have to turn the page. What we were doing for it wasn't working. That we have to have a different mindset moving forward. And it's almost like the admission is the first part. Like, okay, we admit that this is what we were doing wasn't working. We got to try something new here. And when you look at, and this is one thing you brought up about like there were teams were going first to third on their outfielders all the time. The White Sox were making mental errors and like, why are you bringing in this pitcher now? And La Russa was making decisions that were like, what the heck are you? What in the wide world of sports is going on
Yeah.
here? And the thing about those Royals teams that went to the World Series in back-to-back years, especially the team that won in 2015, but also the team that went to the World Series from the wild card game. They were teams that there was great team speed. They were going from first to third on every hit. So when some of the speed wasn't because they were all jackrabbits, but you saw like Alex Gordon was making great, Eric Hosmer was making great base running decisions, and they were always throwing to the right base. They were always you always knew that they got teams back on their heels. You saw really fundamentally sound teams like the Mets,
Mhm.
Baltimore on their heels because you knew they weren't going to make mental mistakes.
Yeah,
The
it's
physical mistakes happen, but they were never going to throw to the wrong base. They were always going to try to push it first to third. And they would squeeze, like, I mean, if the classic play that tied the fifth game of that World Series when it was a ground ball to third, Hosmer waited just long enough before breaking home and forced him to throw a wild throw to home plate to tie the game. They always did that. And if that could seep into the White Sox, who have talent and now do everything right, that's almost a culture change that you're removing the "what are you doing" element of it.
Yeah, it's a proactive, not reactive
Hmm.
initiative, and it's setting yourself up for success. And Jose Castro has spoken of this in the offseason of, you're not there's no guessing games when you go up to face a hitter. Like you've already done the homework. We're going to prepare you to know what you should expect from an opposition on the mound. And those little things, I didn't hear a lot about that in previous off seasons under La Russa and his coaching staff. Now, you also, you've got, like you had mentioned, a team that is very talented, yet we don't know some of the ceilings of these guys. I don't know what Luis Robert, Eloy Jimenez can actually do if they stayed on the field for over
Right.
100 games. That has not happened. Lucas Giolito is hoping for a bounce back year. He has shed weight. He has got back to his old, agile pitching, repeatable pitching motion. Yasmani Grandal, this is a walk year for him. He's put a ton of work. He stayed in Chicago. He was working with a Chicago Blackhawks goalie coach,
Yeah.
working on, stances and, crouches and doing stuff with his legs to better prepare himself. You got Andrew Benintendi, who's going to be an actual left fielder playing left field for the Chicago White Sox, and a left-handed hitter. We didn't have a single hitter hit over 20 home runs last
Yeah.
season. You might have 6 guys that can do it this year.
All right, we're here with Nick Murawski of Locked on White Sox. Now let's do the hard part here. Yeah, you mentioned Andrew Benintendi, and as a native New Englander, rooted for the Red Sox his whole life. Obviously, I adore Andrew Benintendi. It's strange that the biggest free agent signing in the history of the Chicago White Sox is oft injured, and you talk about a varying ceiling. There's sometimes he looks like an all-star, as the second coming of Fred Lynn, and sometimes he looks like, oh yeah, this is just not working out. And yes, he's a better left fielder than anyone they threw out there.
Yeah.
It just seemed like it's like, especially after Abreu, uh, the defection of Abreu to Houston, which again he was a huge part of the team that won, that went to the playoffs in the truncated season, and the team that won the division. He's now going to Houston. This has been a strange off season, and then of
Yeah.
course, I mean, I'm not going to get into all the everything involving Clevinger because things are still under investigation. I don't want to talk about things
Mm-hmm.
as if they're, as if they're final. But at the same time, those things are going to be going. I mean, any amount of homework, that there was baggage that came with him, that you're going to go out of your way to import that baggage onto a team where you're trying to make it more functional rather than dysfunctional. And it seems like Clevenger is going to be the topic of conversation in spring training, as opposed to, hey, we've turned the page. We're trying to be, more focused on the game and the fundamentals. And you invite that in. It just made it was a very confusing off season from an outsider. Um,
Yeah.
what
Well,
was it your
Clevenger, I
point?
mean, Clevenger was signed like he was white hot. Like at the
Yeah.
beginning of the offseason, like they had to have Clevenger. And I
Yeah.
was a little skeptical just before we knew all of the baggage he was bringing in of, well, can he return? How come the Padres don't want to give this guy another shot? You've heard about kind of his character issues, when he
Mhm.
was in Cleveland, and okay, you're going to make him a fifth. I thought the money was a little strange. It seemed like a little high to give that
Yeah.
guy, but yeah, it's a mess. It was a mess at the beginning of spring training, and to your point, like I almost don't want to dwell on it anymore. It's like let this investigation sort itself out.
Mhm.
I think the best thing that can happen right now for the Sox is for games to be going on. Like
Yeah.
let's get some action. The Benintendi thing, I think they targeted a left fielder. They targeted someone that has got a lefty bat. And I think Pedro Grifol had a lot to do with that. It's like, I know this guy from Kansas City.
That's
I've got
true.
a bit of a wish list here of how I want to form a team. And they went after him. Again, Sox aren't going to outspend anybody, but what was it, 85 million? Yeah, that's big for the Chicago White Sox, unfortunately, and that's a whole nother ball of
Yeah.
wax.
Well, you made a great point there that he had his rebound with Kansas City. Like the Red Sox gave up on him. They made the great catch in the playoffs against the Astros, got a couple of big hits, and thank you very much. Take your ring. When yes, Astros fans, there was a lot of stuff the Red Sox were doing in 2018. I always have to bring that up because Astros fans always accuse me of not bringing that up, even though I bring it up every single time I talk about 2018. But that's not the point. He did rebound with Kansas City, and he had a very, very good first half of the season. Made the All-Star team, granted out of Kansas City, where they need to have a live body represent the team in the All-Star game. But if they could get that Andrew Benintendi in left field, right? I mean, that is such a huge improvement.
It's hopefully his hand has healed, that he's 100%. But you got guys like Mike Tosar and Eddie Rodriguez that are coming over from Kansas City that, Tosar is going to be involved in hitting. Rodriguez is your third base coach. So Grifol had other eyes probably that he said, what do you think? Should we bring Benintendi in? Should we go after this guy? And again, it's just if you watched White Sox baseball, you had Andrew Vaughn playing out in left field.
He's an infielder.
He's going to be your new first baseman. So, and he's going to take over Jose Abreu, and no one's ever going to replace Jose Abreu. He will have his number retired. He will have a statue in my mind eventually. But the Sox weren't going to pay what Houston paid. Houston made Jose Abreu like their guy. Like this is the guy we are going after. And I think Jose Abreu also wanted out. I think he wanted to go win a ring, and he saw what was going on in Chicago. And he's like, you know what? You did not surround me with talent. I had to do this all on my own. I thank you for everything, but I'm going to go try to chase a championship. And that's it with it. And I'm okay with it. I'm okay. It's tough to see him in an Astros jersey, but I'm really excited for the Andrew Vaughn era to begin.
Well, keep in mind, people, he did sign to stay longer with the White Sox than he had to. He did give the White Sox 9 years, which means he went beyond the 6 years before his free agency eligibility. And he said, hey, he very clearly wanted to win with the White Sox. He very clearly didn't want to be traded away when it looked like they may have been dangling him. And he very clearly, when they went to the playoffs in the COVID year and when they won the division in 2021, I'm sure he was saying, okay, here we go. This is why I stuck around.
Yeah, I think, he made it. There's a couple quotes, but essentially he would say, hey, if the Sox don't sign me, I'm going to sign myself to this team. Like I want to stay in a White Sox uniform. And that's probably never a good, negotiating strategy, but that's what he did. And he's a fan favorite. And I just think he thought, wait a second, like surround me with some guys, like go out and spend money, like try to break the bank here. We're so close. I need, lightning to the thunder here. And it just didn't quite happen. And so when they drafted Andrew Vaughn in 2019 in the first round it was a very high pick. You kind of saw it as a White Sox fan. You knew it was coming.
Well, with Abreu, I'm sure there's a part of him thought like if you had Luis Robert, Eloy Jimenez, and Yoan Moncada healthy and hitting the ceilings I think everyone thought they were going to hit, then that would have been 3 all-stars surrounding him, and that would have been a great, along with Tim Anderson being healthy. I mean, if you let's say those 3 became the players everyone thought they were going to be, plus Abreu, plus a healthy Tim Anderson, right there.
Yeah.
That's 5 players in your lineup that that's a core that you could build around.
And that, now remove Jose Abreu, but that what you just said is why Sox fans that haven't been completely burned are now, with the first spring training games happening, why that there's this sense of hope. Because what if all of those guys not have career years, but just just stay on the field and can have really good years? Wow, what can we do? And our pitching can stay healthy. A lot of ifs, but that's what's giving you hope.
Do you know where that happened? Where a bunch of players for a couple of years maybe didn't become superstars, but things started clicking? Kansas City with Lorenzo Cain and Moustakas and Gordon and Alcides Escobar and Salvador Perez and a bunch of those players for a couple of years. Things worked out, and yes, it worked out. Moustakas got this big hit. Alcides Escobar goes first to third. All those pieces for a couple of years, things started to fall into place. And of course, if any stretch could give you back-to-back World Series and a title, I'm sure every White Sox fan would take that.
Yeah, it's you got just so many players that we're just waiting. We're waiting to see what they can do, and the pitching is not as deep as I would have liked it. Obviously, we've got some injuries. Liam
Yeah,
Hendricks is focusing on things that are more important than baseball right now, and everybody's hoping that he can.
yeah,
Just keep
exactly.
battling, and
Yeah.
whatever we can get from him, if anything. It's just there's more important things, but they're making some bullpen decisions in the spring, and I do like Cease, Lynn, Kopech, and I am back on the Giolito train. I think
Mhm.
what he's done to his body, shedding some weight, leaner, more agile, more flexible, returning back to what he was, in 2019 or so. I'm excited to see that.
I don't want to end on a negative note, but this is something. It's similar to something I said to Bryce Patrick, because, and again, these are two totally different situations. The DeGrom signing and the Clevinger signings are two completely different situations. But one thing I said about that, and I'll say that's similar about the Clevinger signing, is the biggest red flag for me was that the Padres were throwing money around at everybody and anybody, and they didn't throw it at him. The Mets were throwing money around like it was like the Joker had just lit their giant pile of money on fire, and they were just trying to grab whatever money they could out of that, and yet they let DeGrom go. They didn't make the big pitch to bring him back. And those are red flags to me. That the teams that are throwing money around like crazy didn't fight to retain them as hard, and so that
Yeah,
gave me a little pause. But
yeah.
here's what I'm hoping. Here's what I'm hoping as an outsider, because I like the White Sox. They have some of my favorite players in all of baseball, and it would be fun to see them sort of find their inner 2015 Royals
Yeah, I
players.
want them to have fun, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what you like, have fun, and I again, I'm going to go out to spring training, soon. I'm going to see it firsthand, but everything I read, all the, again, it just there's a different vibe. There's a different
Mhm.
feeling, and I hope again that can continue to grow, and winning can take care of a lot of things, but I think it's like when you like the people you play around and you want to play for them. And Elvis Andrews had a great quote. It's like every team has talent, but it's the teams that can gel. It's the
Yeah.
teams that have the chemistry that can really get things going, playing with some urgency at the beginning of the season, and then you never know what can happen.
And the biggest thing in response to Elvis Andrus, who signed with the White Sox as well, is the dysfunction of the last couple of years, where you have two different it seems like there are two different directions we're going on there. We're going to move in one direction now, and maybe that is that step of we're just changing what it's going to be like to be in the White Sox, because whose team is this? What are we even doing here? This
Yeah.
is what we're doing.
The
This is what we're
veteran presence, you just you can't put a price on that. I guess you can 1 year, $3 million, but for some of these young guys that were going to start second base, Romy Gonzalez, Lenine
Mhm.
Sosa, they're like, okay, I get to watch from Elvis Andrus, who's starting
Right.
his 15th year in the big leagues, and
Mhm.
has done pretty well for himself.
Yeah.
And I think that's great to know who your second baseman is early. Anderson and Andrews can get the chemistry going short and second. And then you're vying for like bench players, utility guys, which is not a bad competition.
Right. Well, hey, Nick, thanks so much for joining us. And hey, everyone else, thanks so much for making Locked On MLB your first listen. Your second listen, obviously, make that be Locked On White Sox. Now, for your third listen, keep them going. Check out Locked On Fantasy Baseball. Win your league. Listening to Matt and Dom every day as they bring the best fantasy draft strategies. Find Locked On Fantasy Baseball wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is indeed your team every day. Hey, Nick, thanks so much for jumping on today's show. Tell people where they can listen to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sully. So yeah, Locked On White Sox on Twitter at Locked On White Sox. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, all that fun stuff, and then I'm on Twitter at Nick _GGTB. Sully, really appreciate the time.
Absolutely, and you're going to be on during the regular season. Let's start to see if the White Sox can find their inner 2015 Kansas City Royals. I think that would be a lot of fun.
Me too.
For Nick Murawski, the host of Locked On White Sox, I am the host of Locked On MLB. My name is Paul Francis Sullivan. Please, I'm begging you, call me Sully.